I'll come back to part two, start my timer, make sure I don't run over. So, why are people worried about meaning in life? So, in this part of the lecture, I want to look at 5 challenges. I think there are probably a lot more than five, but I'm bringing these 5 in as to, wet your whistle, to get you really thinking about the issue of meaningfulness in life. So one challenge about meaning might be to do with the fact that you might have easily not existed. So the fact that any one of us exists is a matter of a lot of luck. So you came into existence when a particular sperm and a particular egg got together and created you. You're a bunch of cells, and then you're a baby, and so on and so forth to where you are now. Not to get into too many of the details here, but if things had only just been a little bit different prior to that sperm and that egg getting together, you might easily not have existed. So suppose your parents decided to walk in the park for a little bit longer, or they decided to see another film at the cinema, or regardless, then a different sperm might have got together with a different egg, and then arguably you wouldn't have come into existence, but rather somebody else would come into existence, someone with a different genetic profile, someone who's not you. And the fact that your parents even met and they hit it off to the extent that they then conceived you didn't have to have happened. It could have easily not have happened. So it seems the fact that you exist, very much a matter of luck. There's a lot of luck going into it. And you also have to think about the fact that how you are now is also due to a lot of luck. The fact that you've had the experiences you've had, the friends you've had, parents you've had, all a lot of luck involved. And you might have easily not come into existence. Or if you did come into existence, you might have easily been a different person. So the idea that we might have easily not existed is sometimes called the contingency of persons. Just a thought is that there's nothing about reality, the universe, the world, that means that you necessarily had to have existed. You might easily have not have existed. And the perspective that you have on everything might have never come about, and you never would have experienced anything at all. Quite easily, quite possible, very easily possible. This might seem a bit worrying. And the basic thought here, and this goes back to a point that James Rachels makes about ethical egoism, is that we're not so special. And so in this context, the thought is that you're not so special that we had to exist. We might have easily have not come into existence. And so people here might worry, well, if it's the case that I might have easily not existed, then how is my life meaningful? How is anything that I do meaningful? I'm not saying this is the most devastating challenge, but it's at least a challenge that you might have worried about. The amount of luck in your life, the luck in you coming into existence might make you think, why does anything mean anything at all? If I might have easily have not existed, then a second challenge is to think about how small we are in the universe. So I'm not making any comments about anyone's height in particular. I'm not a very tall person myself. I mean, if we think about ourselves, even if we focus on the whole planet Earth, right? The whole planet Earth, and we think about the whole universe, that planet Earth is but a very minuscule part of everything that exists. And it's a minuscule part of everything that exists right now at this moment. When we think about everything that's existed in the past and will exist in the future, the Earth, that whole planet that we live on, it's like tiny. It's so little that how can it ever matter? Now, you yourself or any one of us is then a small feature of that planet. So we are a speck on a speck within a bigger, wider thing. And we might think, well, we're tiny, really inconsequential, it might seem, part of everything that exists. And again, we might worry, well, how can we be special? How can we be important in any way? And you might think, well, given that we're just this tiny speck, this speck on a speck within this massive universe, how can anything have any meaning at all? Perhaps this is something you're worried about, and you look up at the stars at night, you admire their beauty, and suddenly you think, well, my life is just a very small part of everything that happens in the universe, and it's going to be gone, and I'll return to dust. It might worry you and make you think that nothing has any meaning. At least this is the kind of challenge, again, that might make you worry about meaning. Third challenge, one that keeps me up at night, I'm not joking there, is the thought that we're mortal and that we'll die and the world will go on. Now, many of you are still quite young, and perhaps this kind of existential question hasn't plagued you at any point yet, but perhaps at some point it will. One way to think about this is to just imagine there'll be some point in the future where you don't exist. Well, there'll be some point in the future where you're dead and you no longer exist, but the world's just going to go on around you, go on without you. You're going to be in the ground, pushing up the daisies, and then everyone else is going to be getting on just fine. I mean, there might be bad stuff happening and stuff as there is now, but you'll be dead and everything will keep going. This future point where you don't exist, sometimes you might think, well, that's fine. Other times, you really, really think about it, you might start to think, how could that be? How could this be? Like I say, some days it doesn't worry me. Some days it doesn't worry me at all. Other days, though, it hurts my brain. It hurts my brain. So this is a challenge that many people think and worry about, and it's something we return to in later lectures. The fact we die seems to take away any meaning from anything that happens, right? I mean, think about it this way. You have all these lovely memories of childhood and your friends and family and the nice things you've done, thoughts about the future and all the things you're going to do, or your plans. But at some point, all your memories are going to be gone. You're going to be dead, or your loved ones will be dead. Anything you achieve in life is going to be destroyed and completely crumbled and ashes. And at some point in the very far future, the universe itself will go out of existence. And then what then? And you might worry, well, given all this, what is the point? How is there any meaning to anything? Whew. Now, a fourth challenge was, how can we even create meaning? So suppose there is meaning to be had in life and existence. Is it something that we can access as human beings, as agents, as persons who are able to act and reflect and consider moral reasons and do other such things like that, other things like that? One thing we're going to talk about in the collaborative class is worries about free will. So what I'm presenting to you here in the text is a version of what's sometimes called the dilemma of determinism. So the thought here is that everything's either determined or it's not. If it's determined, then you might think, well, if all my actions are determined, everything in the universe is determined, then I can't have free will. And you might think, well, maybe everything's not determined. But if things aren't determined, then there's a worry then that everything's just lucky, that, well, why does one thing cause another thing? It might have easily been something else. And the worry then is there that if determinism is not true, it's not clear how we would get free will that way, because it seems that everything would be lucky. So the worry is that either way, we lack free will. And as we'll see, there are various, we're not going to go into too much of the free will debate. That's something you'd cover in 2A next year in philosophy. But the thing we're going to focus on is that if we lack free will, then it might seem that we are never able to add anything to the world. Now, there might be certain conceptions of free will that you can have in a deterministic world, but there still might be this worry that you're never going to be able to add anything to the world. You're not going to have genuine creativity. Things are either going to be the product of external forces, events external to you, things that happen before you're born and your circumstances, or they're just going to be things which are a bit lucky and random, things that you then can't really have control over. The worry is that even if new stuff comes into the universe because of you, it's not really you adding it. And if determinism is true, then you're not going to be adding anything. Things are just going to flow from external causes. And either way, how can you create meaning if that's the case? If you're either determined or just, subject to randomness or luck, where's all this meaning coming from? So there's a worry there was, how can we have any meaning? Maybe there's meaning to be had for certain people. Maybe God has a meaningful life. But how can we as mere human beings create meaning, be the kind of things which add meaning and stuff to the world? Now, the final challenge, not something we're going to come back in too much detail to throughout the lectures, but I think it's worth mentioning. as a way of thinking about meaningfulness in life. And this worry is skepticism. Perhaps you've come across this already. So there are certain skeptical scenarios presented by certain philosophers. So one of them is the French philosopher René Descartes. So Descartes asks you to imagine that there's a deceiving demon. He has his own purposes for it. But what we're going to think about here is, how do we know that all the experiences that we have are not the result of a demon that's just trying to deceive us? How do we know then, since if we can't establish it's not the result of the deceiving demon, how do we know that the external world even exists? So I'm touching this laptop, I'm touching this screen, putting my hand over the camera, and it seems to me like I have hands and things exist. But how do I know that's the case? What if I'm just being deceived? A second skeptical scenario comes from the English philosopher Bertrand Russell. He asks you to imagine, well, what if the world has only just come into existence? What if, up until 5 minutes ago, nothing existed? But then 5 minutes ago, the world and everything in it came into existence along with you. And you came into existence with a bunch of memories, a bunch of thoughts and feelings. And these memories were of the past. But how do we know that that past actually existed? For all we know, we came into existence 5 minutes ago as we are now, with all these memories and everything of all those things that happened. Another thought, more general thought here, is solipsism. What if only your own mind exists? How do we know that other people have minds? So we have this perspective on the world, and we have these experiences of colors and sounds and thoughts and emotions. And we think there's a world with a chair and a glass and a phone and all kinds of things. How do we know any of that exists? Well, if there's an external world, that might exist, but then when we're around people, how do we know that they have the same experiences that we do, that they feel the phone and they experience it the same we do, and they have this internal mental life and these feelings and thoughts? How do we know any of that? Now, we're not here to answer any questions about meaningfulness, but I think these skeptical scenarios can also help us make us think about meaningfulness in life. One question here is, how can anything have any meaning given that we can't refute these skeptical scenarios? A second point is then that, well, how can we know anything has meaning? So maybe things do have meaning, but these skeptical scenarios seem to threaten knowledge. They threaten our access and knowledge of what is meaningful. So like I say, that is just some reasons or challenges that people have to the idea that life is meaningful. I think there are many others. We'll come across some variants of these challenges throughout this section, and I encourage you to think about other challenges that you might have to the meaningfulness in life, things that make you worry about why life is meaningful. For now, I'm going to stop for the second part, and then we'll come back for part 3.